Hi, I'm John from the Christian Century, and I'm joined today by one of our new Voices columnists, Alejandra Oliva. She recently wrote a piece for our November issue. The piece is called Knitting with Simone Weil, and we're going to be talking about that more today. But first, Alejandra, hello. Why don't you tell us a little bit more about who you are?
Hi, it's so nice to chat with all of you. I'm Alejandra, and as you may learn from the piece, in my day job, work doing communications and community work for an immigration nonprofit in the Chicago area. And while we have some local branches, there's also like some national work that we do, but I've been doing that since about 2019, since I graduated from divinity school. And then when I'm not doing that, I am a writer.
Very cool. Well, let's talk about this piece, which I loved. You talked about how a lot of your work can be depressing because of the crises that you are communicating about, and in the midst of Zoom calls and other tasks, you will often knit. And you talked about the ways that the repetitive motions can actually be really helpful for you and even connecting with your work more. Could you tell us a little more about the knitting you do and why you might find that to be helpful?
Yeah, so I have always been a doodler, a small repetitive motion foot tapper and stuff in-person meetings. And I'm someone who like knits while she watches TV. Like I have figured out a way to knit while reading. It really having these small repetitive motions going on with my body helps me keep my mind a little more focused. And so knitting during meetings, which I try to do, which I always do off camera, and it's usually just very simple knitting patterns. I'm not like doing lace work or anything in the middle of meetings. It helps me sort of be present in my body and be able to pay better attention to whatever is going on. And as I talk a little bit about in the piece, there are times that my work feels like it's not doing a whole lot, which is not to say that like it doesn't matter or that I'm not getting things done, but just every day there's like some new horrible headline about what's going on in the immigration world. We work and work and work for new policies, and sometimes they get passed and sometimes they don't. And in the meantime, you are talking to like individual people whose lives are being affected by this. And that can be really challenging and really, really difficult to sort of sit with and deal with. And I think that being able to do knitting work and to be able to hold up after, a month's worth of meetings and be like, well, we're a little closer to getting this policy passed and I have a sweater I can wear now is like a little bit of a nice compromise or a nice way to feel like time is passing and like things are happening even when it's harder to see that sort of reflected back in the world around me.
Yeah, well, thanks for sharing about that. Um, I'm grateful for the work you do in your day job as well. You mentioned in the piece that there is a particular essay by Simone Weil that you think about often. And in that essay, she talks about something called experimental certainty. I was curious if you could tell us a little bit more about that concept and how you might have experienced that.
Yeah, so she doesn't, I think, explain it too much, but it's this idea basically that if you do this thing, if you show up every day, the way that she talks about it is she compares it to both a school child learning Latin or like figuring out a geometry proof, but also in prayer. If you show up every day, if you are there with your attention, with yourself, with your presence, and you keep doing it and you keep showing up, it is both an experiment that you're running every day and also a certainty that by showing up, by doing this every day, eventually something will happen. You will feel the presence of God. You will be like, oh my God, I understand Latin now. Just something is going to come from all that attention. And that is what the kind of work I do feels like sometimes. Like it's just a lot of people showing up every day, both with their whole selves, or with, whatever part of their self decided to show up this morning, because it's work and sometimes you're tired or you're sick or you're wishing you were on vacation, but you're there. And something has to happen. Something will happen eventually. And it's both living in this space of experiment of like, well, we've been doing this for a while, but I think we have to keep doing this to see if it'll keep happening. And also certainty of like, this many people, this many like good people, well-intentioned people can't keep showing up like this day after day and just have things stay exactly the same. And so that's kind of how I see that happening in my work.
Yeah, that makes sense. Near the end of the piece, you mentioned, I thought it was fascinating how your act of knitting situates you in this long history of textile arts, a history that I admit I know almost nothing about. You listed a few examples of what you meant in the piece. Could you tell us a little bit more about this history, what it means to you?
Yeah, so I think here in the US, we're pretty familiar with the quilting bee as one of the things that people, you come together, you have your quilt top that you've pieced together out of all your family's old clothes that no longer fit or are too worn in places to like be clothes you take into public. And you have this quilt top, and then you have to take all the other pieces of the quilt, the batting and the backing, and you have to sort of sandwich them together and then like sew all of it together in all of these different ways. And to do that, it was very common to bring together a group of women who would sit around your quilt in a circle and start quilting it and start piecing these three pieces together and bringing it together. And it was an excuse to bring the community together when people lived very far apart. It was a way to get this big piece of work done really a lot faster than you would. My sister is a quilter, and I have seen how long it takes her individually to do the actual quilting and the binding, and it takes a really long time. She does them by hand. It's incredible. And then there are also all of these other different kinds of sort of communal things where people come together, mostly women, because textile work has been women's work for a very long time, in a lot of different cultures. And they work together. I believe the other example that I mentioned are women in some of the more far-flung British islands who will sing a song together in order to tweed their wool, or to felt their tweed, which is to say to like sort of make the fabric denser and to knit it together. And you can watch these videos of women on YouTube singing in Scots, I guess, as they sort of card the wool back and forth and sort of hit it with these stones. And there's different examples of women coming together to do this kind of work, sometimes with songs, sometimes just sitting in a circle gossiping, from all these different cultures. And even though I feel like a lot of like contemporary modern day textile arts are really like, oh, this one individual came together and embroidered this piece or made this sweater, it's actually a long-standing communal practice that a lot of different cultures and a lot of different people come together to do.
That's so cool. My wife got into quilting in the last year or two, and before we moved from Pittsburgh, she was in a class of women, and yeah, it was such a rich source of community. So yeah, I think that that's a real phenomenon all over the place.
Yeah.
Well, I'm sure we could talk more. Maybe we can. You'll be writing voices columns for us, so we can have more conversations. Um, if anyone's interested in more of Alejandra's writings, in the video description below, you can find a link to this article that we've been chatting about. You can also find a link to learn more about Alejandra's forthcoming book, Rivermouth. To close us out, Alejandra, you want to just tell us a little bit about what that book is about?
Yeah, so this book really takes off from all of the immigration work that I've been doing for the last couple of years. And it's about translation, both in practice and in theory, and what it means to translate for people who are trying to immigrate. And about all of these different areas where we can find the border, not just, the physical land border between the US and Mexico, but also courtrooms and detention centers and clinics where people are trying to apply for immigration help. And so the book is sort of about me as the first generation daughter of immigrants going through all those different places, and also, about what we owe people who are coming into this country.
Oh, that sounds great. Well, thank you so much for being here today and chatting, Alejandra.
Of course. Thank you so much for having me.